Our next keynote speaker is Mr. Ludwig Decamps, talking on the subject of NATO Joint Intelligence, Surveillance and Reconnaissance Capability Development. Mr. Ludwig Decamps is the Director, Armaments and Aerospace Capabilities in NATO headquarters, and as such is responsible for the promotion of NATO armaments cooperation and programs, and in particular the areas of integrated air and missile defense, aerospace management, joint intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, and a broad range of cooperative programs, including NATO's smart defense initiatives. He's had a number of important positions in NATO at a time when those positions have been, what I would say, in the eye of the storm, including Director for Strategy in the Defense Investment Division when Smart Defense was first launched, Head of the Armaments Program Support Section with a portfolio at that time over ballistic missile defense and allied ground surveillance, two huge programs. Achieving coherence and unity of effort in some of the huge and complex JISR capability areas is a challenge, not just because this must be achieved within a broad network of stakeholders, but also because what needs to be developed and delivered must be relevant for the contemporary alliance at the time of considerable change. Mr. Decamps will now share his thoughts on NATO's joint ISR capability development activities, highlighting where NATO is and where it is going. Mr. Decamps, we very much appreciate hearing what you have to say.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is still morning. I'm very grateful to be part of this very inspiring environment, and many thanks to the General Manager for allowing me to say a few words on the topic we at NATO have been working hard at implementing the past few months. But before I'll go further with my presentation, I would like to move towards a small animation.
NATO is an alliance of 28 countries tasked to ensure the security and defense of its member nations' populations. Combined, that's over 900 million people. The world is changing, and NATO needs to adapt to meet future challenges. Nations are working together to do this, developing tools like the Joint Intelligence, Surveillance and Reconnaissance capability. Joint ISR is a combination of processes, systems and people, including NATO, and national air, maritime, ground and space assets, which feed into fused reports. So how does it work? One scenario could involve an unmanned aircraft system providing high-resolution imagery of tank activity, while airborne radars detect hostile aircrafts, and satellites monitor population displacements. Troops could ensure people's safety with identity controls, while special forces closely watch for rebel activities around the city. Finally, ships could monitor sea traffic along the coast to avoid piracy attacks, and submarines could penetrate hostile areas to gather encrypted communications. All this information is then relayed to analysts, who combine the information to provide the right person with the right information at the right time. Better information means better decisions. We call this decision advantage.
So what I believe this short animation shows, I believe quite nicely, is that the business of joint ISR is at the heart of military operations, providing insight and context to political and military decision makers. For NATO, we believe that these are the three tenets that we need to address to be successful on joint ISR. However, both the animation and the slideshow that I'm going to present tell you is that the reliance on data, information, and the means to move that information to the people that need the information is really at the heart of joint ISR. So I'll run through a couple of slides to show how we are approaching this capability development, and I will highlight a couple of attention points that I believe are relevant for this specific audience. So how we at NATO enabling that to happen? The diagram of the joint ISR cycle perhaps illustrates how our initial efforts are put together towards a common goal. Whilst I don't intend to go into the detail of these different steps, it's important to note that we have focused on virtually all elements of the NATO intelligence cycle and look to make improvements across all lines of development. And the efforts, as you can see, fall into three main categories. Just to tell you, this is not system-centric, it's actually data-centric, and we need therefore a comprehensive rewrite, which we are doing right now, of doctrine and procedures, the establishment of a catalogue of joint ISR training opportunities offered by allies for allies, and the creation of network architectures that facilitate interconnectivity between a myriad of ISR systems and networks. I want to mention that to facilitate much of that, we are leaning very heavily on a group of 9 allied nations that have come together in what is called the MAGIC initiative. And actually, they have been doing the innovation on joint ISR in very close cooperation with the NATO NCI Agency. And so we're building very heavily on that innovative approach from those 9 nations and want to make that available to the alliance as a whole. So what have we done to find ourselves on the path towards achieving an initial operating capability by the end of this year? As you can see here on the slides, we have brought the innovation from the 9 nations towards a real environment in terms of initially organizing a major joint ISR trial that we did in May of last year called Unified Vision, where we put many of those procedures and technologies that were developed in a research and development environment, we put them to the tests with real operators. This was a stepping stone towards the next milestone, the exercise Steadfast Cobalt, which is a major CIS exercise that was held this year in May, preparing the NATO response force rotation for next year. And again, we learned a lot from that exercise. And then now we are working towards the major exercise called Trident Juncture in October and November of this year to ensure that all what we've gained through the initiative can be embedded and made available to the NATO response force. An attention point I would like to share with you here is that trials and exercises, collective training, really provide an excellent opportunity for capability development. And I'm sure that's also the case in terms of information assurance exercises and so on. To achieve the initial operating capability that I mentioned in the last slides, there is an underlying structure that we have to ensure so that we can work in a cross-domain network. You see here a very limited picture of what we have tried, what actually we have put in place for the trial and also for the exercises. And you can see that it's a multi-domain environment with a NATO secret network, with a BICES network, which is focused on intelligence sharing, with a mission secret network adapted to a specific composition of a given mission, also involving non-NATO allies. And also the alliance ground surveillance has to be connected to that environment. So the teaching point here is that the reality dictates us to organize ourselves so that we can work in such a cross-domain network environment that is key for joint ISR. I believe it's also key for the topic that you are discussing during this symposium. This is a more detailed version of what I showed you before, actually not just to show you the complexity of what we are dealing with, but also to mention the opportunity and challenges. One of the questions earlier this morning was, what do you believe, I think it was Ambassador Dukar who asked that question, what do you believe is the strength of the alliance and what is the main weakness of the alliance. When I look at this, I believe the strength of the alliance is that it's an alliance of sovereign nations who all have their own information available, and if we can connect those nations and share those data in a coalition environment, that is a very powerful construct. At the same time, what is the weak point of NATO is that it's an alliance of sovereign nations. So when you just look at the potential vulnerabilities in this network, and if you just amplify the vulnerabilities of that network, then you will come to the conclusion that you have a huge problem. The key point I want to make here is that we in the joint ISR community, we are so dependent on the trust that the nations can give to the environment they're working in. Because the trust generates a need to share, or actually facilitates a need to share. If the trust is gone with regard to the network, then obviously the information flow will stop immediately, and we don't want this to happen. Now, all that, I gave you a picture, a simplified picture of joint ISR architectures, but one should understand that there are some enduring enablers that need to be put in place to create this architecture, and so that as architectures tend to change, coalitions change, you have ad hoc coalitions, you have NATO-led operations, and what will be the next coalition operation, who knows. But you need enduring enablers to put in place so that you have a solid foundation on which you can build those architectures. And then things come to mind like metadata harmonization, which has been a major effort in the joint ISR initiative to allow this cross-domain flow of information. And again, as you can see on the slides, many standards have been developed to ensure that nations can plug and play in that network environment. And I recognize very often when you mention NATO standardization, then you lose the attention of the audience, frankly speaking. But I cannot overestimate the importance of setting common standards that really meet the requirements and put that in a realistic exercise environment so that these standards can also be met when needed in real-life operations. And I think this is also an important attention point in terms of information assurance. Right, this just is a picture again. It is intentionally complex just to show the main standards that we have envisaged or that we have putting in place to allow this joint ISR data flow happening. And of course you need to prioritize your standards. If all the standards are equally important, then none of them are important. So we have focused our attention on a limited list of standards that we really need for joint ISR to happen. And we are working hard to ensure that before nations come to an exercise or before nations actually sign up for a real-life operation, that they can test the compliance of their systems in a test environment, so that military commanders understand up to what level they are compliant and what are potential limitations of their systems in the broader environment. I think that's an important point to mention. Right, I'm almost at the end of my presentation, but before concluding, I would just like to highlight an important capability program that is under development and that I really see as a game changer for joint ISR in the Alliance. It's called the Alliance Ground Surveillance Program. As you can see on the slide, this is the acquisition of 5 Global Hawk systems, so remotely piloted aircraft that will be operated as a NATO organic capability. The main operating base will be at Sigonella, at Sicily. And so this is a NATO-owned capability that I believe will indeed be very conducive to further expand the joint ISR environment, because of course people focus immediately, and so do I for this presentation, on the platform, but there's a whole system behind it in terms of processing, exploiting the data that comes from huge data packs actually that come from such a system. And to that end, we are building an analytical center at Sigonella, at the main operating base, which I believe, once established for the Alliance Ground Surveillance Program, should be optimized for use with other surveillance platforms. So I really see this as an excellent opportunity to make an additional step towards a more solid joint intelligence surveillance and reconnaissance requirements. You see some dates here in terms of entering into service, so it's not that far away, and so we really need to get ready to operate that capability within the alliance, and also deal with the quite significant data traffic that comes with it. And I understand that is an issue that was addressed in one of the working groups earlier during the symposium. Right, to sum up, I wish to be clear that NATO joint ISR is heavily reliant on the cyber domain, particularly in the context of information awareness. I think you will agree with that point of view. Providing allies with a secure network to send and receive ISR information is really fundamental to enable a robust and well-equipped organization. Not to mention the trust, again, this element of trust that I mentioned, that such assurance of a trusted network should bring to those actors in the ISR business. All allies, and that's the good news about joint ISR, all allies, big and small, can contribute by providing data derived from a multitude of sources on the ground, in the air, and the sea. But for this to happen, however, national forces need to embrace training opportunities, adopt doctrine and procedures for ISR data sharing, and connect interoperable servers to provide and receive ISR data, in accordance with agreed standards. Again, the issue of standardization is key to achieving our goals. But above all, also a strong mindset with the willingness to share as the rule, not the exception, is really a must. And that's where the information assurance community has a huge role to play in generating that trust that these nations can operate in such an environment, that they really are willing to share critical data, and quite sensitive data actually, as you can imagine. So, but even with a highly trained workforce and strong procedures, the base for contemporary NATO joint ISR success is a secure and reliable network, a commonality that runs through each step of the pyramid that you see here on the slide. So again, I think talking in terms of what we try to achieve for joint ISR and what I've heard this morning at this symposium, this is really a win-win situation, because between those people who work on joint ISR, and many of them come from the NCI Agency, and those who work on information assurance. And again, the agency plays a key role, which in itself allows to build that synergy that I was talking about. So this concludes my presentation, and I welcome any questions that you may have.
We do have time for a few questions, so if you have any questions from the floor.
So I'd like to pick up on your last point. There seems to be a natural connection between cyber defense and joint ISR. So do you see some of our joint ISR processes being used in cyber defense and vice versa? And how do we make that connection in NATO?
Thank you for that question, because it opens a very interesting perspective. I heard this morning, I think it was somebody from the industry say, in the cyber domain, we need to do reconnaissance to be able to evaluate the threat. I don't think we have gone far enough already in exploring what joint ISR in the cyber domain for the purpose of cyber security or information assurance means. What does intelligence mean? Okay, we have some rough ideas on that in the cyber domain, but what does surveillance mean? What does reconnaissance mean in the cyber domain? I'm sorry I have to answer your question with another question, but I think it's an interesting thought that we need to explore further.
Very interesting presentation. I can't believe you got through an entire presentation without saying federated. You use standards throughout. I appreciate your views on if you accept and embrace a federation type of a concept, or are you still strictly into standards and those standards have to be met in the GISR world? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This allows me to emphasize the importance of the federated mission network environment that we now start to take as a given in the joint ISR domain. Actually, right from the start, we came with the very firm conviction that we don't want to build something that is tailored just for the needs of joint ISR. We need really joint ISR to be embedded as one function within the broader operational environment. And that can only be done in a federated environment. That goes without saying. And actually, it's when we discuss this back at NATO headquarters and elsewhere, we always take care that people who work on the federated mission network are part of the group because there's so many opportunities to actually to have this cross-interaction across the two initiatives. And the last thing we would like to do with joint ISR is to do the heavy lifting that is already done by other colleagues in terms of entrance criteria for linking up to the federated mission network and so on. So yes, this is closely synchronized and in sync. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have time for questions. So Mr. Decamps, thank you very much indeed.
Very much.
Very good.